Hello and welcome back to the show. This week I'm talking with Hanna Munro, and Hanna is an occupational therapist in the UK, and she specializes in working with kiddos with autism and ADHD who have sensory difficulties. And I'm really happy to be having this conversation today because I feel like occupational therapy is an area that can be kind of undervalued in terms of, I don't know that everybody understands the full scope of what an occupational therapist can do and can help with and can support. So I'm really glad to hear from Hanna and have her share what all she does and how she helps our kiddos, and also the strategies that she has for those of us who have our kiddos at home with us. So Hanna, please tell us all about you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm in the UK. I'm in the Lake District in the northwest of England. And I've got two boys. Both are autistic. One goes in special education. And one is at home, home educated since last Christmas, because he couldn't manage in school. And he is too bright really for special education, so there's nowhere for him really. So we're home educating and all the lovely challenges that brings. And thankfully, I am self-employed as an occupational therapist. I have a sensory clinic, which is really important. Occupational therapists need to, it's all about play. I can't bring a child to see me and have them sat at a table and chair, as I'm sure you understand.
Yeah.
So I've got an amazing clinic with zip wire and trampoline and swings and all sorts. And that's like you said, I specialize in autism, ADHD and sensory differences.
That's amazing. So you have not only professional experience, but also personal experience with your kiddos at home. You know where I want to start, Hanna? I would love for you to talk about how sensory challenges can show up, because I think, like a lot of things, I think they can often be misunderstood and misidentified as behavioral issues. So I would love if you can talk about that more. What might somebody see if their kiddo has sensory challenges? And then how do you support that? How do you help with that? What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, and when you were just saying that, Steph, I was thinking about the idea of layers. And I think, if you just have one sensory challenge, which isn't likely, you usually have more. But if you have one, it probably doesn't make that much difference, but they all layer on top, and when we talk about things like sensory overload, I think that's the idea of all these sensory challenges layering up and then it just becoming too much. So the kind of things we're talking about, noise is one that most people know about. But even noise, the thing about sensory is I always wish it was simple, when I'm explaining it in a conversation like this or to a parent. But it's not as simple as being oversensitive to noise. It can be what's called a perception issue, where it's not about the volume of the noise, but it's the different pitch, or, some children, if their teacher is talking, but the class is noisy, they can't screen out that background class noise and hear the teacher. And that's not about the volume being too loud, that's them being able to perceive and pick out the right sound. So yeah, it is quite complex, but to answer your question, other things could be tolerating your parents eating. That's come to mind, because that was my big one. When I was younger, the noise of my dad eating, it wasn't just annoying, in my whole body, it was unbearable. And I don't think some people realize that, it's not just the child's you know, they've not just got problems with behavior or emotional regulation, but that noise is actually doing something to their bodies and they just can't, you know,
Yes, there's a physical reaction.
yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting when you're talking about sounds. I definitely have an issue with loud sounds. I have a really significant startle reflex. And so loud, unexpected sounds are probably one of my biggest challenges, but also you talking about the air conditioner in the classroom. I was at an event last week, and it's in a small room. There was maybe 15 people there, and the air conditioner in this building, in this room, because I've been in this building before, just in this room that we were in, was making the worst sound. And I don't even remember now what it was, but I was so bothered by it. And I'm looking around the room and nobody else seemed to care. But it was loud, and it was not a typical air conditioner. It wasn't the sound of the fan. It was like there was something wrong with it. And I was so bothered by this sound, and I just wanted to get out of the room. And I'm looking around and nobody else seems to be fazed by it. But I thought, it's loud. I mean, how can other people not be bothered by that? So yeah, and I also whistling. I cannot handle it when people whistle, which is kind of sad because whistling is like one of the happiest sounds in the world to most people. But the pitch of whistling, I cannot handle noises at that pitch. So yeah.
And have you had maybe for some of the people you've worked with, some of the kids crying? That's a big one, especially babies. Like babies,
Yes.
that's really difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, babies crying. Yes. And because we have different ages, sometimes the older kids have a hard time with the younger kids, just kind of their voices. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, I've heard people talk about, other people chewing. I cannot use an electric toothbrush because I cannot handle the sound and the feeling of it in my mouth. I cannot handle either one of those things. The same when I go to the dentist, it's probably one of my least favorite things to do is going to the dentist because of the sound that's right in your ear, right? Because they're in your mouth, it's right in your ear. And the vibration in my jaw. I mean, just all of those things together. It's I actually avoided going to the dentist for I think like 15 years when I was younger. Now I'm older, and of course when I started going again, I had to have all kinds of procedures and stuff done. But I even mentioned to you before we started, I have sensitivity to lights too. So the lights that I turn on when I record, it's the only time I ever have them on, because by the end of it, it's so much in my system with these lights coming in.
So, and I think for the lighting, for the children I work with, it's often like you say that it's not that you turn it on and it's immediately horrible and you have to turn it on. It's that, cumulative effect.
Yeah.
So, they maybe don't realize. So they can't go home and say to their parents, oh, the lights in class, they're like causing me sensory overload. They don't say that. They don't even know that. It's just all day long. It's like, adding to... and then that's when you have one of these meltdowns when you get home. It's actually the background sound, the light, all these things build up. And and then there's also people, we're often taught, aren't we, about 5 senses. And I don't know why, because there isn't 5 senses. There's at least 8 senses, and the ones that we're missed out being taught are the really, really important ones.
I would love for you to go into that more, because I definitely agree that I think there's so much about OT and sensory that we don't always have access to the information. So I would love for you to go into the senses more.
Great. So yeah, I mean, a really key one is the vestibular sense. So the easy way of thinking about that is just to call it the movement sense. So I mean, it's to do with a lot more than movement. It's to do with balance and spatial orientation. But the receptors for your movement sense are in your inner ear. And, you know, you have a child that's maybe rocking on their chair, can't sit still. You want them to just come and eat a meal for 10 minutes and they just can't do it. Maybe they're always, you know, diving and jumping off things. You take them to the park and they, you know, they've been to the playground, they've been there for like an hour and they're not tired, you know. that's vestibular movement seeking. But with all the senses, there's the two sides to it. Yep. Yes. So that's one end, that's seeking movement input. The other end of movement difficulty is being really cautious, getting travel sick, you know, especially maybe sitting in the back seat of a vehicle, and even like tipping your head back to wash your hair. If you've got vestibular processing difficulties, that can make you feel dysregulated. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up that point too about how on one end we're avoiding stimulation and on the other end we're seeking stimulation. And I think it's one of my favorite things to do is swing. I absolutely love the feeling of swinging. And I even in summer camp, we go to a playground most days. And I used to always go and swing with the kids, even though it's a child's playground, right? And there's even a sign on the swing set that says something about a weight limit or an age limit or something, I'm not sure. And so I used to always go swing with the kids. And then one day the swing tore my shorts open right down the backside because I am an adult. I am a little too big for the swing set. But I love that feeling of swinging. But yeah, then on the other end of it are people who any kind of motion like that completely throws their system. And so, and it's even with, you know, we talked earlier about the auditory and the visual, you have the same, right? You have people who are trying to avoid certain stimulations because they're getting overwhelmed, and you have people who are seeking. And that's, you know, it's funny, sometimes I have parents talk about how their kids are noise sensitive, but then they're the ones making the most noise. You know, I see that a lot too. I think there's certain types of noises. But yeah, just to understand that I think we typically think about sensory challenges as being trying to avoid certain things. But then there's also the other end, as you mentioned, where we're actually seeking, like I seek the feeling of swinging. I seek that out, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, what would be really simple, so it's not the case, is if you had a person and they were just avoided all of the senses, or they were seeking in all of the senses. But of course, it's different. So I love the analogy. It's not my analogy, but it's called the cup analogy. And the idea is to think of each of your sensory systems as a cup. And to feel good, so to feel regulated, you want your cup to be full to the top. So if it's empty, you don't feel good. And if it overflows, you don't feel good. But so I've got this huge, great cup. So let's say I've got this huge, great cup for my movement system, but I could have a tiny, tiny cup for my auditory hearing system. And so this big cup means that I need so much movement to be full. You know, and no matter what I'm doing, it's like so hard to get full because my cup is so huge and I only feel good if it's full. And then this tiny cup for my auditory system, only a few drops too much sound input and I overflow and I'm in meltdown. And then I could have a typical size cup for my visual system, and then another huge cup for, you know, another system. So everyone has different size cups for all their system.
Yeah, I love that analogy too. That's a really great one with the different size cups. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I think that's a great visual representation of what you're talking about. And when you talk about how it would be nice if everybody, if everything was even, but it's just not. Yeah, I love that. And I would, Hannah, I would love to talk about some of the, let me think of a good way to say it. Maybe common is a good way, some of the common strategies that people can use for their kids or themselves in different situations. I'm just thinking about, like, I know for me, I've been doing some flying lately, and I wear noise canceling headphones on the airplane. I don't mind the sound of the airplane, actually. I mind the sounds of everybody around me, of the 17 different conversations that are happening that I can hear simultaneously. That's really annoying to me. And so I wear noise canceling headphones to drown out the sound of everybody else talking. And I know in classrooms, sometimes you'll see light filters. They're covers that can, because most classrooms have the fluorescent lights. Yeah. And so you can get covers that go over the lights that filter that light. I like to use lamps instead of lights. What are some other kind of common things that you see that support kids that have sensory challenges?
So I think it would be good to talk about proprioception, because it's a sense in itself, but it's also, people call it the antidote to the other senses. So what that means is that if we show a child how to engage in more proprioceptive activities, it has like a dampening down effect on whatever sense it is, whether you're sensitive to light or sound. If you do more proprioception, then it kind of takes the edge off.
Oh, I would love to talk about this more. I have not heard this before.
Great. Okay. So proprioception is about muscle resistance. So we have the receptors in our muscles and our joints, and it does link with body awareness and grading of force. So, we often children that struggle with proprioception, they'll stomp their feet, they'll slam doors, they'll put their drink down and spill it, so that's to do with body awareness. So proprioceptive activity is anything with muscle resistance. Think of pushing, pulling, lifting, on a bike, that's muscle resistance. Climbing's excellent, because if you think that you're climbing, it's your full body against gravity. And also swimming, again, your full body resistance. So what another great thing about proprioception, I often actually joke that I should have a badge just saying I love proprioception. I do get quite carried away, but another great thing is that you can't have too much proprioception, which is different to all the other senses. You can have too much sound, it gets to a point where it's too much, and too much light. But proprioception, the worst thing any parents listening are going to do to their child is just tire them out.
Yeah.
Like that, they're not going to get overloaded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of actual strategies, as well as making sure that their children do as much proprioceptive activity as possible, the things like climbing and swimming and all those things, there's like little I call them quick fixes. So like star jumps, or jumping up and down on the spot. Oh, I think you call them jumping jacks, don't you?
Yeah, you call them star jumps. I've never heard that phrase before.
Yeah.
I like that better, actually.
So yeah, jumping jacks and just jumping on the spot. And it's not the most fun, exciting one, but it's really effective. It's just called a wall push. And so you just stood up, pushing. And with younger children, I'll like joke with them. I'll say, come on, like, see if you can push the wall down, pretend you're Hulk, can you like push it as hard as you can? And if your legs are kind of separated, like lunging forward, you're getting this really nice feeling all the way down your body. And that's the kind of thing, some of the older kids I work with, they'll have a pass to get out of class if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed, and they'll go off somewhere quiet and they'll push against a wall, or they'll squeeze their hands, or they'll push down on their head. They're just little things.
Yeah.
And it's not magic. They don't then feel amazing, but they just take that edge off.
Yeah, that's really great to know. It reminds me we call them like wall push-ups. I know that planks, if you're doing planks, I've heard that that's one of the only exercises where you're using every muscle in your body in a plank. And so a wall push-up, I think, is just a standing version of a plank without as much, weight resistance with your whole body. So I think that's really helpful. I also I know when I was teaching, one of the strategies that we used was having kids go run an errand, even though it was never real. So for example, we would give them a note and say, hey, can you please go take this to the office, or go take this to, Mr. Smith or whatever. And there wasn't anything on the note necessarily, but you can also give them a backpack with books in it to carry. And so just, they're out walking down the hall, carrying a heavy backpack, running an errand that really has no purpose other than to give them that sensory input. And I know when I had Starfish Social Club in person, we would go do different events and activities, and one of the things that we did repeatedly was go to trampoline parks. And we were in a big city, so there were many different options. And I was always impressed we would be there for 2 hours, and most of the students never really got tired of jumping. I mean, it was impressive how, and every single student that we took enjoyed the trampoline park. Every single person. There's different activities where sometimes certain kids are like, this isn't really my thing, or whatever. But the trampoline park, 100%. Every student that we took really enjoyed jumping. And so that was always interesting for me to watch that.
And so with jumping, you've got that vestibular movement like you'd get on a swing, but you've got the proprioceptive muscle resistance. So you've got the two. And that's, that's two big reasons. And when you combine it, that's why it's so effective.
Oh, that's a great explanation. I know a lot of people use the mini trampolines, at home or in school or wherever. I think, that's a really probably one of the easier things that you can have set up in your home. I mean, some of the things you could have set up can be quite elaborate, but I think a mini trampoline is one of the easier things that you can have set up in your home, in your classroom, in your clinic, wherever you are. And yeah, that's a great point that it addresses a couple different things.
I think another key piece of equipment that's cheap is like, I don't know if you call them therapy balls, yoga balls, physio balls.
Yes. Yeah. Probably yoga balls would probably be what most people would understand.
And you don't have to do anything fancy, just sitting and bouncing on them,
Yeah. I think with a yoga ball, I think you could give a yoga ball to 5 different kids and they would utilize it in 5 different ways, right? We tend to do what we're seeking. So I think it's, you may have some kids who just roll on it, right? Like they go like belly first and they're just rolling over it. Like you said, you have some kids who are going to sit and bounce on it. You have some kids who might like dribble it or toss it. So I think you're right. That's another great thing to have, because each kiddo is going to utilize it in the way that they feel they need. So it's a really versatile object.
And actually, it's reminded me probably one of my favorite activities with the therapy ball. I call it therapy ball rough play. And it's my kind of solution for, a child that needs that rough play, that physical, that wrestling. And then I'll see 2 issues. One will be maybe that they'll be able to do it at home with a member of the family that can take that, but there might be a member of the family that, physically can't do that. Or schools will say to me, well, we can't do that at school.
Right.
So I have a video of this on my YouTube channel, which like I'll try and explain it to you, but it's sometimes better to see it. But if you imagine if I'm the adult and then this child's facing me, and we put the ball between us, and we have like a wide stance so we're not going to fall over, and we're just both like hugging the ball and we're trying to push each other over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really physical because it's our full body weight. And that's that proprioception with a bit of movement, and it's fun and it's silly, but it's not, you know, wrestling. You know,
Right,
nobody
right.
gets hurt. Yeah.
It's a safer option. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, even, you know, you mentioned there may be somebody in the house who isn't physically able to engage in things like that. But I think even if you could even do that like sitting down, right? Kind of as an adaptation to that.
Yeah.
You could do it with one person up against a wall, so they're not having to exert as much force or pressure. So yeah, I like that one a lot. I agree. I think that's a great way to get that engagement without it being so physically taxing on another person.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I love all these strategies. These are really awesome. I also, you talked about the cup analogy, and I know there's also a spoon analogy. So do you want to share that one as well?
Yeah, sure. So I like to think that again, it's not, you know, it's not my analogy, but it's a good one. So I like to think that we've all got, let's say, 10 spoons a day. And if you want to talk to your child about this, it can be their favorite character. You know, it's a spoon is just a unit of measurement, so you can pick whatever. So we've got 10 spoons, and if we start by thinking about this perfect child that doesn't exist in real life, but you know, they wake up, everything's fine, they get themselves dressed for school, they have the breakfast, and they arrive at school and they've got all 10 spoons. Maybe it's math first and they don't like it, so they lose a spoon. Maybe they fall out with a friend at break time, so they lose a spoon. But they're going into the afternoon with 8 spoons. And then, you know, they get tired because school's, you know, challenging, and they lose a spoon. This child is going home with 7 spoons. And a child that's going home with 7 spoons is a child that can sit nicely at the dinner table, or can go to grandparents' house, or can do a club, you know. And then, yeah, so if we think about, you know, what our experience, you know, is, or, you know, if I think about my children, just, you know, getting up and getting out of bed is a challenge, you know, that's a spoon gone. Getting dressed, you know, tolerating that clothing that's itchy, and, you know, having to wear, just even get clothes on, that's a spoon. So, you know, many children that I work with are going to school and they've used 3 spoons.
Just getting there. Yeah.
Just getting there.
Yeah.
And then, you know, lining up to get into school, they don't like that. That's difficult for so many reasons. They lose a spoon. It's noisy as everyone's getting into class, lose a spoon. So some children are starting the first, you know, period, and they've only got I don't know, I've lost count of my spoons, but they've got 5 spoons left.
Yeah.
And
less than 10.
Yeah. But many of them, by the afternoon, they've got no spoons left, and really no spoons equals meltdown, or it equals, sometimes I'm not sure if you've talked about this before, but, you know, worse than meltdown to me is shutdown. Where a child like looks fine, they're very well behaved, you know, to me that's worse than meltdown, because they go unnoticed, and the teacher thinks they're fine, but actually their nervous system is just shut down. But either way, they're going home and their parents just get an explosion because they have no spoons left.
Yeah, that's interesting. Earlier when we were talking about the sound and the light sensitivity, I had this image in my head of kids riding the school bus home. Because I know for me, like, school buses are the bus itself is very loud, and then you have all the other kids on it, and you have the movement and the stopping and the starting, and so I just had this image in my head earlier about kids on the bus, and now adding that to the concept of the spoon theory. And it's like, how many spoons did you have left when you got on the bus? And how many spoons do you have left by the time you get off the bus? And another thing that's really prevalent for our kiddos is kids with ADHD. I think this is also relevant for autistic kids, but research has showed specifically kids with ADHD get significantly more negative feedback throughout their day than a neurotypical kid. And so, every time somebody is being redirected or corrected or called out for something, or, just has maybe an unsuccessful social attempt, I mean, that's your spoon count too, and it also adds to the anxiety that our kids have. And so it's like this, it's like our kids, there's so many more, I don't want to use the word opportunities, there's so many more instances that may cause our kiddos to lose a spoon than there may be for a neurotypical kiddo. And so it's like a rigged system,
Yeah.
we may wake up with the same, but just like you said, I woke up this morning where I am, it's really cold right now. And so I woke up this morning and I guess my arm was out of the blanket, and immediately I'm like, that is so cold. And then I don't want to get out of bed because like now I'm physically uncomfortable. Right. And maybe I did have breakfast this morning, but some mornings I wake up and I don't want to make breakfast, or I don't want to eat what I have for breakfast, or, I just think there's so many things when you have sensory challenges that can just take away those spoons so quickly. Like I said, my first thing when I woke up this morning is I was really cold. And so luckily I'm self-employed and so I don't have to get up at any certain time, but I can just imagine being a kiddo and that being, 6 o'clock in the morning. And now I have to get up and get ready for school and I'm physically uncomfortable. So yeah, just things like that.
Yeah. I think the spoons, if a child is able, it's really good to start engaging in a conversation, with parent and child. There's actually a free download on a site, something like Spoony Kids.
Okay.
And it's really nice, and you can use that worksheet to kind of talk to your child about the school day and like what takes spoons, and then if the teacher is willing to have that conversation, you can kind of open it up. And what I say when I'm speaking to schools is like, it's about prioritizing, because we can't literally take everything that costs a spoon away. So it's not about saying, that the child's got to keep all their spoons, but it's saying, well, that takes a spoon and that takes a spoon. What's more important, and are they working on their social skills and actually going to eat lunch with everyone else that's really noisy? Well, for that child, that one, it's worth that spoon because that's what they're working on. But that child, actually, they need to eat lunch in a really quiet space because they're working on something else. So it's balancing it all, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really great point. I really like even your analogy about eating in the cafeteria, because I absolutely agree with even just the made up example that you had, right? That because I do have some of my students, they want nothing to do with eating lunch in the cafeteria, but some of them are willing to tolerate it because that's where they get to interact and engage with other kids. And the same, for some kids, for older kids, the transition in the hallway between classes is the same thing. I've worked with some students who want nothing to do with being in the hallway between classes. And so they'll usually leave class early so that they can get to their next class and be there when everybody else is leaving. And then I have some kids for whom like that's their chance to, see other kids and hang out with other kids. So I think that's a really great way to look at it. I think it's easy to blanket sensory interventions. I think even when I think about headphones, right? That I think it can easily be, me think about how I'm trying to say it, maybe not a stereotype, but like a go-to intervention to suggest that somebody wears headphones without recognizing really what their challenge is, because it may not be something that headphones, has anything to do with. So I think sometimes with sensory, it's easy to do blanket interventions that really may not be at all what that kiddo needs. So yeah, just wanted to make the point about that too. And I think, can you also talk about the concept of a sensory diet?
Yeah. So I think it can be a bit misunderstood, because really it shouldn't be prescriptive. And it's easier if it's prescriptive, but again, it's not, sensory isn't simple. So I think sometimes when people think of a sensory diet, they think of a plan, and they want to know that child before class needs to do 10 jumping jacks, and then after the first lesson that they need to go and run outside, and they want this plan that's very like rigid, and then they can just follow it. And I understand why people want that, because then there's that feeling of I'm getting it right because I'm following the plan from the OT. But what we need with a sensory diet, I think sensory diets need to go hand in hand with sensory training. So whoever's working with that child needs to understand those subtle signs. So, for that child, when they're tapping their pen, that's a sign that they maybe need to get up and move, or for that child, when their behavior, is escalating, maybe that the sound's getting too much. So when everyone working with the child understands that child's behaviors and their sensory needs, then for me, then a sensory diet is a kind of list of all the things that work for them, the wall push, the jumping jacks. And then that person working with the child needs to select what to do with that child. So, I mean, you can be a little bit prescriptive. You can say this child tends to need a sensory break after 15 minutes of concentration, or this older child can tolerate an hour and then they need a sensory break. So, it can be a little bit prescriptive, but there also needs to be understanding from whoever's working with the child. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your clarification and guidance on that. I think, and even as an adult, I would say I've just started being more aware of my sensory needs in the last few years. And, I've been alive for a while. So I think it's sometimes kids will have an idea of what they need or when they need it. But I think even as adults, we don't always even have a good concept of that. I know I'm on the board of directors for a school in San Antonio, and when we have meetings, I'm almost always the first person to ask for a break. And so it just gets to the point where my system, like I've been sitting for too long, I've been listening for too long, my brain is getting full. And so most of the time, if someone's going to ask for a break, it's going to be me. But I think it's really important for everybody who struggles with sensory to understand that's okay. It's okay for you to ask for a break. It's okay for you to need to go outside. It's okay, and I even tell my kids, even with our classes on Zoom, I would love for you to have a fidget while we're in class, right? It doesn't bother me at all, as long as it's not a distraction to the group. But I'm constantly playing with something when I'm, even right now doing a podcast, I have something in my hand. And so I think fidgets are amazing. Asking for a break is amazing. When I sit, my legs are always moving. But I think it's, number one, I think it's important for the person to be able to recognize what things are helpful for them. What do they need? What do they need to be able to do? And then for the other people in their environment to be supportive and accepting and accommodating of that. I think sometimes kids in school, I've heard of teachers putting a square of tape on the floor, right? And you are welcome to walk around, in this square at the back of the room. Kids having their desk away from other kids so that they have room to, do whatever it is they want to do. Even in one of my classes last week on Zoom, one of the kids was making a lot of noises. And so I just muted him. And he unmuted himself and he apologized. I said, well, you don't have to apologize at all. You can make noises all you want to. Just know that if you don't mute yourself, I will, just because it's disruptive to the group. But you can make noises as much as you want to, just do it on mute, right? And so I think it's helping kids recognize whatever you need to do to regulate yourself is totally fine. We just want to be respectful of the people around us.
Yeah, and have you heard of sensory ladders?
No.
So it's really relevant to what you're saying. So it's based on the zones of regulation alert program, type theory, but it's a lot more personalized.
Okay.
So I mean, you can have it basic to quite complex. And the idea is that, let's say we have quite a simple ladder. So I work with a child and they're interested in, I don't know, The Simpsons, and they have so they have maybe Lisa in the green area, and then they maybe have Homer in the red area, and whoever in the different areas of the ladder. And then they have different keywords. So in the green area, it might be able to concentrate, happy, calm. In the red area, it might be overexcited, angry, frustrated, but also anxious, because it's not, that high arousal isn't just anger and frustration. It's also anxiety. And then the low area of the ladder, the bottom rung of the ladder, is about being can't be bothered, fed up, tired. And older children will have more rungs, it can be a bit more complex. But then the last section on each rung of the ladder is the strategies. So in the just right section, it says, what can I do to stay just right? And then in high arousal, it says, what can I do to get back to just right? And the idea is that we can't expect children to just be able to self-regulate from the word go. So the teacher and the parent would be saying to the child, oh, I noticed that you're starting to seem like you're creeping up to Homer Simpson up here, and then shall we pick one of the strategies so you can get back down to being like Lisa Simpson again, or that. And that character thing's really important, because you want to get the buy-in, don't you? The child's got to be motivated and think it's fun. And it also takes a bit away from them, because we're not saying we're using the characters as well. And then initially the parent or the teacher might pick the strategy and say, I'm going to pick a strategy from your sensory ladder, but then you work towards maybe giving them a choice of 2. And then in the future, the idea is that they will just know, my arousal level's increasing and I've got these 5 strategies and I'm just gonna excuse myself from class and do one of my strategies, and that could take years, but this sensory ladder is a really good way of getting there.
Yeah, I really love that concept. And I think I was just thinking about, I had a rough day yesterday. I mentioned it's really cold where I am right now. And so we're recording this on a Monday. On Saturday and Sunday, it rained constantly and it was close to freezing. So I'm a very physically active person, but I can't go ride my bike. I can't go running. I can't go hiking. I didn't want to drive anywhere because the weather was just so bad. And so I was at home on Sunday all day. I live by myself with my cat. And I was kind of losing my mind because that's my big thing to do is physical activity and exercise. But I couldn't go do my favorite things to do, and I didn't want to drive to the gym. And so I think I would have benefited from having something like that that has alternatives. What are the things that you can do when the weather's bad? I think, for kids who are in school, what are the things that you can do while you're sitting at your desk? Right. And just kind of sometimes having, here's some plan B strategies, right? What if you're not able to go take a break? Or what if it's raining outside? Or, all these different things. Well, here's some things that you can do at your desk. Or, here's some things that you can do at home when the weather's bad. So yeah, I think I really love the latter concept. And then I think to have some plan B, strategies as well. I love all of that. Okay, Hannah, is there anything else that you want to talk about or share before we wrap up today?
I think just before we came on, we had a quick chat about, the massive scope of occupational therapy. And I think I know some people that very much link occupational therapy with handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much more. So maybe it's just nice to acknowledge that. I mean, out of pediatrics, occupational therapists, they work in prisons and hospitals and everywhere.
Yeah.
In pediatrics, handwriting is a big thing, and all the kind of academic, like the schoolwork, but occupational therapy, if you take the word occupation out of occupational therapy, in terms of what is occupation, an occupation is absolutely anything that we want, need, or like to do. And if we think for a child, that's play, it's learning, and it's everything. It's fastening buttons, tying shoelaces, riding a bike, it's going to Girl Scouts, every single thing is an occupation. And I think the reason sometimes people don't know that they need an occupational therapist is because it's so broad. We help with absolutely everything a child wants or needs to do. So when there's a barrier that's stopping a child, so in my case, it's when the barrier is something to do with the autism or ADHD or a sensory need. That's when I look at, well, can we adapt the environment to help? Or can we teach the child a new way of doing it, a different strategy?
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And I think, so just like when someone is autistic, it means that there are language challenges. That's a part of having a diagnosis of autism, right? Is that there are language challenges obviously to varying degrees and various types of language challenges. But I think it's the same for occupational therapy. It's, there with ADHD, sensory challenges are rampant, and again, sometimes it's that we're seeking. Right. So you may see that more often that, kids with ADHD are seeking. Kids with autism, I think, tend to be, more on the overwhelmed, overloaded side. But I think if your kiddo has a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, which is, most of the people in my audience, and you aren't engaged with an occupational therapist, I would definitely recommend that. In the US, through the school system, you can request an evaluation. School-based occupational therapy is specific to school. So you are less likely to qualify and less likely to get services through school than you would be in the medical realm, because they're two different things. But you can ask for an occupational evaluation through your school. You can go, health insurance usually covers occupational therapy. So you can seek an evaluation with your kiddo, outside in the medical world. But I agree. I think there's so many things that could be supported by occupational therapy that people just aren't aware of. And I think it's just like you said, because it's such a huge field, it's almost like overwhelmingly large.
Yeah. And if people search my name for my YouTube channel, there's loads of videos. So even if you're not seeing an occupational therapist, there's little activities that you can do at home. So that might be helpful for some people.
Awesome. That was my next question, is where people can find you online.
Yeah, so I'm mainly my Facebook page and YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's Hanna Munro Occupational Therapy.
Okay, so I'll put that in all the show notes for the podcast and the YouTube, Hanna Munro Occupational Therapy. Awesome. Hanna, thank you so much for being here. This was a really great conversation, and one that I feel like benefits everybody who's listening, whether it's for their kiddos or for themselves. I feel like this has been a really enlightening, beneficial conversation. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And to everybody who's listening, thank you for being here. I'm always glad that you're here, and I'll see you again next week.